A little bit about Albert Bandura. Bandura was born on December 4th, 1925 in the small town of Bandura, Alberta, Canada. This town was so incredibly small that his high school had about 20 students total. The limitations of education in a remote town such as this caused Bandura to become independent and self-motivated in terms of learning, and these primarily developed traits proved very helpful in his lengthy career. Bandura's introduction to academic psychology came about by a fluke. As a student with little to do in the early mornings, he took a psychology course to pass the time and became enamored with the subject. Bandura graduated in 3 years in 1949 with a BA from the University of British Columbia, winning the Bolakin Award in Psychology, and then moved to the then epicenter of theoretical psychology, the University of Iowa, from where he obtained his MA in 1951 and PhD in 1952. In 1953, he began teaching at Stanford University, then served as president of the APA in 1974. In 1980, he received the APA's Award for Distinguished Scientific Contributions, and in 2004, he also received the Outstanding Lifetime Contribution to Psychology. He has been responsible for many contributions to the field of psychology, including social cognitive theory, social learning theory, self-efficacy, and most importantly, he is responsible for the 1961 BoBo doll experiment. And now we're going to tune in to an episode of Psychology Today.
Good morning and welcome back. On this episode of Psychology Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Albert Bandura. Dr. Bandura is one of the most influential psychologists of all time due to his social cognitive theory, the concept of vicarious reinforcement, and of course, his dashing good looks, as you can see. Thank you for taking time to come talk to us today. So tell us a little bit about how the BoBo doll experiment came about.
Well, this experiment initially came about in 1961 as a demonstration of the social learning theory, which says that people learn through observation and modeling. It shows that people not only learn by being rewarded or punished, but they can also learn from watching people being rewarded or punished.
Oh.
These experiments are important because they influenced many more studies on the effects of observational learning, and they have implication on how children can be influenced by watching violent media and playing video games.
Well, that's very interesting. So what happened in that experiment?
Well, at the time, there was a crazy notion that watching violent videos reduced aggression. So, in order to study this pattern of behavior, I experimented on small children aged 3 to 5. I put an adult in the room with a bunch of toys, including the BoBo doll.
Could you clarify to the audience what a BoBo doll is?
Oh, of course. It's an inflatable doll about 5 feet tall, painted to look like a clown. The bottom is weighted so that if it's hit, it would fall over and then immediately lift itself back up to its upright position.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So, what did you do with this?
So, after about a minute, I had the adult start beating up the doll with the hammer while kicking, shouting, and screaming while the child was observing from a different room. After about 10 minutes, the child was allowed to enter the room and given no instructions with what to play with. And what we found was fascinating.
Well, I'm very intrigued, and I'm sure the audience is too. So, as a special treat to our viewers, we're going to test the theory out in the studio.
So, as you can see from this experiment, we found that children exposed to the aggressive model were more likely to act in physically aggressive ways than those who were not exposed to the aggressive model.
So, has this experiment brought about a lot of news coverage?
You could say that. There have been many stories in the media covering my experiment. In more recent times, news stations such as BBC have done in-depth video coverage discussing my experiment and my findings.
Would you say that through all of this coverage, there's any controversy involved with your experiment on the BoBo dolls?
Well, not at the time, not when I did it, but in more recent times, some radical behaviorists don't like my theory of social cognitive behaviorism. They believe that a few cognitive processes, such as belief and anticipation, have no effect on behavior whatsoever. However, I think it's hilarious that radical behaviorists believe that thoughts do not affect your behavior, yet they spend hours and hours researching and writing in order to convert people's views or people's beliefs to their point of view. In other words, they're proving my theory correct. They would not be researching this topic if they had not intended on disproving my theory in the first place. Also, critics argued that the experiment was unethical at the time. For example, there is the problem of whether or not the children suffered any long-term consequences from the experiment as a result of the study. Although unlikely, we could never really be certain. In my opinion, however, I think the children just had an excuse to have fun with a silly doll for a few minutes. What's the harm in that?
So, what exactly does this event say about human nature, and why is it so important?
Well, this experiment simply adds credence to my theory that all human nature is learned through social imitation and copying, rather than inherited through genetic factors.
Touché, Bandura. So, what can we take away from this experiment regarding whether it changed any part of psychology?
It proves my theory of social learning, that is, children learn social behavior such as aggression through the process of observation learning, or through watching the behavior of another person. This theory was a major turning point in the study of human behavior.
Wow, that is fascinating. Thank you so much for meeting with us on Psychology Today, Albert Bandura.
And thank you so much for having me, everybody. Well, that was a pretty informative television show.
Yeah, that was cool.
Wow.
And can I just say, Albert Bandura is such a hunk.
I know.
Sexy.
Wow.
Sorry, babe. So, how does that even relate to our class right now?
Well, observational learning is a process in which learning occurs through observing and imitating others. As demonstrated in Albert Bandura's classic BoBo doll experiments, people will imitate the actions of others without direct reinforcement.
Okay.
Yeah, and in class we've learned a lot about the three major types of learning described in behavioral psychology. Those are Pavlov's classical conditioning, Skinner and Thorndike's operant conditioning, and now Bandura added to behaviorism by demonstrating observational learning.
Oh, okay.
It all makes sense now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Hampton.
Thanks.
We should do bloopers at the end.
yeah.
Oh my god, we have to.
Okay. So, sorry, got children exposed to the. Right. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to get my shit together. Okay. All right. You could say that. Well, you could say that. You could say that.
You sexy man, you.
Demonstration of the social learning theory.
Okay, just stop it.
And modeling.
Okay.
It shows that people not only learn by being rewarded or punished, but they can find the clicker noise, like, phew.
Yeah.
Should I say babe or honey?
Babe. Sorry, babe.
Okay.
That's a wrap.